emotionally, your fear. So, what does that mean to experience it emotionally? It means that you will work through your fear and come out the other end of it without having it. That's what it means. So if after 6 weeks of this little process that we're going through, or 4 weeks, or however long you're going to choose to do it yourself, you don't come out of your fear, then you are not emotionally experiencing your fear yet. All you're doing is staying and living in it. And that's not what I'm suggesting to do. And in fact, what you'll find, if you stay and live in it, you will probably get quite angry with me over the next 6 weeks. And many of you who stay and live in it, if you choose to stay and live in it, you won't come back again because you'll be so upset about your fears getting triggered. You see, whenever our fears get triggered and we want to deny them, what did we say yesterday? We go straight into anger, into the anger, the denial of anger. So I'm not suggesting you do that. What I'm suggesting is that you experience emotionally the fear. That will also mean experiencing it bodily. Now, yesterday I described what that felt like for me. When Mary's up, maybe she could describe a little what it's felt like for her recently. And what we can do is just talk about what you may go through. And the key is, during this whole process, is to realise that you are safe, everything is going to be right, if you just keep processing it emotionally. Everything's not going to be all right if you just live in it, trust me. What's going to happen if you just live in it is you're going to attract even more events that are fearful in your life than you're attracting already. So that's the choice you have to make. There's a choice here. The choice is, do I start this at all, or do I really do it properly? That's really the choice. Because you don't want to do it half-heartedly. You stay it half-heartedly and you live in it, and you'll find your life will have some pretty harsh things happen in the next 6 weeks. So I'm not suggesting you do that either. I'm suggesting you use the tools you've already been given over the last year and a half to actually get into and process emotionally the experience of fear. All right, perhaps Mary, if you could come up and we could just talk a little bit about what your experience has been about fear. Yeah.
So when we process these fears, we're just processing the fear. We're not going down underneath that, the grief or whatever is underneath it?
Well, the fear is because of the grief. So you will find when you process the fear, what will happen is you'll probably do a lot of bodily things and all of these kind of things, and you breathe and you feel yourself trying to breathe, and you feel locked up, and you may actually even go into a fetal position even with your fear, and then eventually you'll break through that into the grief that's underlying it. So many of you may find yourself getting into the grief that underlies the fear, certainly. Sarah?
I just want to say I found recently when I've been processing, I've done the both at the same time. I've been crying and then like my teeth are chattering and I'm shaking, and then crying some more, and
that's right.
Yeah, it's like a combination.
And that's what it's often like.
Yeah.
The key is to not try to intellectualise this process very much. If you allow the emotional experience, your body knows and your soul knows exactly what to experience. The key is just to go ahead with that experience and go through it rather than living in it. When you go through it, you come out the other end, you feel a sense of peace generally. So that's a good indication of whether you've actually dealt with the emotion or not fully. If you're not feeling a sense of peace and you're still in agitation, then there's either more to it, or you're actually not dealing with the true emotion. You're just living in the emotion. So that's something to be aware of. So when you started doing it, Sorry, can the air conditioner be a bit warmer? Is that what you're asking? Is it a bit cold? Yeah, so maybe if we can make it a bit warmer. Thank you. Thanks, Rana. All right.
I found the difference when I started to feel about my emotions, or to try and connect emotionally with myself, was when I started to recognise that I was in fear. I would say, okay, I'm afraid, and just try and sit with that. But eventually I got to feel the difference between when I was resisting the fear and when I really had to take the step to let it overwhelm me, to just sort of surrender to the fear.
And what happened when you did that?
Various things. Sometimes I shake quite a bit. I just go and lie down, and I experience sort of full body shaking and trembling. And like Sarah, sometimes I go into tears, and then I'm crying again, and then tears. Because I find that as I'm processing the fear, immediately the emotion that it's capping starts to come up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes you've gone into a real sort of almost childlike state with it, haven't you? And I've picked Mary up and taken her to bed and just put her in bed and put the covers over because she's shaking with cold even though it's hot. And that's a good indication. If you're shaking with cold even though it's hot, then obviously there's some fear stuff coming up for you there. Many of you feel addicted to having hot drinks still. And that's a good indication that that particular moment there's a fear that you're usually shutting down.
That was definitely the case with me. I would drink 3 or 4 cups of herbal tea a day, and I went through a period of, I can't remember what the fear was at the moment, but I processed one big hunk of fear, and I hardly drink hot drinks anymore. And if I notice myself wanting one, I wanted one this morning. Because I'm feeling quite fearful about today, then I immediately can try and connect with what it is I'm avoiding.
Yeah. So does everyone sort of understand like the processing of it, if you like? It's not going to be the same. It's not going to be an intellectual process for you.
Sometimes it is just tears for me though as well. Sometimes it's just sobbing in fear.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Do you have a question? Yep.
When you said you noticed some fear is coming up because you drank or you felt you wanted a herbal tea, did you then actually drink it this morning?
No.
So not drinking it helps the fear getting up. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. So that helps the processing, because right now I don't know what processing is.
Yeah.
I haven't. I think, what are they doing? What am I missing here?
No worries.
Thank you.
Yeah. Perhaps if we could illustrate a little of what you felt this morning, and then wanting to go for the drink, which was, you know, it sounds like she's going for the alcohol, but it's not actually like that. In the past it might have been like that, but and then maybe what you actually chose to do instead, and you're still staying in it now. So if you could describe some of the fears that you were feeling when we got up this morning.
So I've been very afraid about AJ doing this presentation, because in my experience, when people are very afraid, they get angry, and that was my experience as well. When I met AJ, I got very afraid and I got very angry at him. So I sort of felt like I knew what I was talking about. And I'm very afraid of people attacking us and being angry at us. I'm very afraid of judgment, and I'm also really triggered because we're in this bigger venue and there's more people coming, and so it's like a double whammy of fears this weekend. Yeah. And because there's some new people here as well, so...
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so one of the things you're afraid is that the ones that are new will judge everything based on this weekend,
yes.
rather than actually look at all of the information that's been presented. So what's the fear in that? Is that when you started tracing it back this morning?
I got to 2... So what happened was I was feeling quite anxious this morning, and I wanted to eat, I wanted to have a hot drink. I was pacing around, AJ was busy, and then I realised I was feeling quite fearful. So I just went and lay down and tried to let myself connect with what was going on, and I was trembling a bit and feeling quite cold. And what I sort of just let myself feel, okay, what am I afraid of? Just let it come. So I'm afraid of this big place, I'm afraid of these people, I'm afraid. And I got down to basically, I'm afraid that we'll be attacked and that we'll be alone, pretty much. Or that, yeah, rather than people just leaving us alone, that we'll be actively attacked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's been times in the past even already where somebody just doesn't leave us be, you know, like you'd think if you had your own belief and I had my own belief that we could basically just leave each other be. I'm happy for you to have your belief, but it seems that a lot of people are not very happy about me having my belief, and that's been a fairly large source of attack that's come towards us. Is obviously people hear these things and then they go down the line of not wanting us to have the belief we have, and then they go into lots of judgment and lots of rage even. So we've got some really nasty, violent emails in particular, you know, swearing and cursing us and so forth, and all just because of somebody can't let us have our own belief.
Well, and that's my law of attraction.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I have this huge fear.
Yeah. So oftentimes too, Mary finds that you basically get cold, don't you? So it's like we can be in the same place and all of a sudden you'll just go into this cold place, physically cold.
Cold, feeling all queasy or butterflies in the tummy, shaking. I'm pretty good at, or I used to be really good at avoidance of using different things to get out of it. So the drinking the hot drinks, the distracting myself with different things, and it's only been since I started to be a bit more vigilant with my own what's happening internally that I feel now more physical symptoms, like I've got really cold hands and I get quite pale and I feel shaky, that kind of thing. Yeah.
When I was going through it myself, I used to get so cold that I used to be a computer programmer, and I used to sit at my desk with a heater on, and I'd get a sleeping bag and I'd actually put the sleeping bag on me. Like, so I'd get in the sleeping bag. And fortunately, all the offices that I've ever had, I owned, so that was fine. So I'd get it in the sleeping bag, and I would just sit there with my hands out, and I'd put these like gloves on with, you know, with the fingers out, and I'd be there like that, and I would still get cold, right? And I'd be there, and after I get so cold that I'd have to move around a bit, and it didn't matter what temperature the day was, I'd still have cold hands and cold feet. Cold hands and cold feet, by the way, very good sign. There's quite a lot of fear to work your way through. All right?
And I would say for us, those things that we're the feeling queasy, the feeling pale, the feeling cold, we're triggered on the fear, but we're not processing it yet. We can actually live in that place for quite a while, and that's not the same as processing it. Yeah. That's more just your indication that there's fear to feel.
That you have fear, yeah. Because what I found is I lived in that place for a lot of years. Like, so for 7 or 8 years, that's how I'd program, like in a sleeping bag.
You could have done some kind of cross-marketing with camping stores or something.
Could have, yeah, I think about it. It was quite funny because people would come to visit me at times and they go, "What are you doing?" You know, oh, just a bit cold on the hands and feet. Yeah, and no matter what I did, I just couldn't get warm. You know, so you know what it's like sometimes where you just feel like you just can't get warm no matter what you do. Well, that's a good indication there's a fair level of fear within you to work your way through. So if you can allow yourself to see that. The physical symptoms of fear very much are cold. Cold, obviously, is one of the physical symptoms of fear. Your body has the ability to regulate its temperature in a large range. And yet, for the majority of us, that range is severely reduced by the fears that we're experiencing, or I should say not experiencing, and actually living in. So if you find your body is very sensitive to temperature, hot or cold, then there are usually, if it's sensitive to hot temperatures, it's about anger and shame. If it's sensitive to cold temperatures, it's about terror and fear. All right? So they are just general indications of what will happen in your body.
I just wanted to ask, sometimes when I'm really relaxed, like almost about to sleep, like my leg will just start to shake uncontrollably. Is that the fear coming up?
Yes, what will happen to your body at different times if you allow your processing of fear, you'll find your legs will do and arms will do all sorts of things. And I've had my jaw even doing the same, like that by, by
mine
itself.
Does that now too.
And all of those things, and that's all part of that release of that terror and fear. So the key is to not judge these things happening in your body. These are necessary parts of the release. And you need to just allow them to occur and breathe and keep your breathing, diaphragmatic breathing happening, because that's going to allow yourself to experience those particular sensations.
Thanks.
You need to put the mic right up, the on button. The on button, I mean. Yep.
What about screaming as an expression of fear?
Screaming is also very good as an expression of fear. Usually it's a combination of fear and rage, but it's a very good way to actually connect with a lot of your fears too. Of course, sometimes it's very hard to get into that emotionally when you're triggered, unless somebody frightens you. And I'm not suggesting here that you basically traumatise yourself with even more fear. So sometimes it's very, very hard to get into that. If you find yourself triggered and scream, let yourself continue the fear process straight after you've screamed. Does that make sense to everyone? So let's say somebody surprises you and you go, ah! And now there's an opportunity there, you see, to connect to what's underneath that. And so go into that opportunity straight away. But yes, screaming, you'll have many physical expressions, and voice is one of them. Terror, by the way, is very, very different to fear, in that terror often causes you to freeze up completely. Whereas fear, you will often have a flight or a fight response, right? So the key is whenever you feel like fleeing a situation, so let's say you walk into a supermarket and you just feel creeped out and you feel like you've got to walk out again, there's fear being tested there. So my suggestion would be stay in the supermarket and let that fear come up. What is this fear about? I allow myself to feel my fear, allow yourself to experience it. There are other situations you get angry about. We've already talked about anger. So every time you get angry or annoyed or upset or any of those kind of things, there's fear usually in those particular expressions as well. Does that make sense? So whenever you notice yourself angry or trying to run away, that's fear. Whenever you find yourself getting to this place where you freeze up, that's terror. And you could say terror is the pinnacle of fear, but terror also needs to be released. And the only way you can release it, like most others, is breathe your way through it and allow yourself to stay in the state. Now, there's been times in my life where I've stayed in that state for 2 or 3 or 4 hours at a time, and I've just allowed myself to breathe through that process. Now, of course, that's a bit hard if it's been triggered at work or something. You're not going to be very productive for 3 or 4 hours. So obviously, you're going to have to work through that particular stuff about your work situation and so forth. But the idea is to connect with this terror, if you have it, and feel it. All terror-based experiences are usually childhood referred from parents, in other words, multi-generational injuries from parents who have experienced terror, or terror that's occurred in your own childhood. And those terrifying events can be anything from your mum and dad screaming at you when you picked up a spider, and them terrifying you more than the spider did, or right the way through to physical violence. And most of us, when we were little, had some kind of physical violence from our parents, or right the way through to things like being, sexually or physically abused. And if you've had those things in your past, then there's terror probably to deal with in yourself as well. If we come to Ray.